Hey, welcome to the show. I love that we're adding the video component these days. My guest is Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Eric, how are you?
Well, I'm pretty good, and I'm glad that I got some of these.
Oh, nice. For
Did you?
for those listening to the audio version, I believe that was a silver round.
Yes, it was. And the reason that I display that is to just use that as the entree point for talking about the news that gold is up to nearly $4,000 an ounce, and silver apparently is at about $40 now for an ounce, which is remarkable. It's an astonishing increase in the value of real money, which can be perceived or looked at as a reflection of the diminishing value of the fiat currency that we're all forced to use, which is just oilily and sneakily ensurfing us. Americans don't, I think a lot of Americans don't understand the hidden tax that inflation is, that's imposed on us. Whatever money you are paid that you're allowed to keep after the government steals its chunk of it is then devalued in its purchasing power. And they refer to this as inflation. And I've never liked that word because I think it's at odds with what really is going on here, which is the devaluation of the buying power of your money. I was at the supermarket the other day, yesterday, because I needed to get a fresh bag of cat food for our cats. And the same bag of cat food that I bought 2 weeks ago for $16 cost me $18 yesterday. And I'm just wondering what it's going to cost in 2 weeks. Is it going to be up to $30 at some point? It's going to be, I'm not going to be able to afford to feed my cats anymore.
I think the grocery store is probably where most people are getting their first feel of where inflation is. I mean, we feel it at the gas pump too, but every time I shop for groceries, I have the same experience. I get something and I go, huh, same price, but this seems smaller. And usually it is. It's a classic case of shrinkflation where, sure, we'll sell you a lesser amount for the same price you've been paying. I think I mentioned to you before we went on the air, my son and I stopped for a drink at the gas station the other day, and he grabbed one of those, I think they're Arizona teas or Freedom tea, something like that. But they usually come in a nice big tall boy can, and there's plenty of, liquid to rehydrate you. And lo and behold, the price hasn't changed much. It's gone up a little bit, but the can suddenly is back to standard 12 ounce, just like everything else.
Yeah. And the price is up by what, 30 cents, something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, they were 99 cents forever. And I try not to get discouraged when I see that. But then again, I also, we had a case lot sale that's going on right now here locally. And I stopped in and, stocked up on the things that I know I'm going to be using.
Yeah, I think discouraging is one thing, alarmed is another. It's kind of like a person ought to be alarmed when they're swimming in the ocean and they see a fin nearby. I mean, I reference in the article that I just published a couple of hours ago, Weimar Germany, and more recently Zimbabwe, two countries that experienced hyperinflation. And some of the people in the audience who are younger, 30 or under, might not be aware of the fact that in Germany in the 1920s, things got so bad that people were literally pushing wheelbarrows full of paper currency to the store. And they were pushing it fast because if they didn't get there quickly, the loaf of bread that they might have been able to buy with that wheelbarrow full of money, they might have needed to get another wheelbarrow full of that paper money to buy that same loaf of bread.
Oh,
And
man.
I hope to God that that doesn't happen in this country. But we've got what, $37 trillion in debt, and they continue to pump the inflation out. Oh, and I see no end to it, and this could result in a catastrophic economic collapse for this country. And I dread this because of the effects that will have politically and socially, and hope it doesn't come to that.
Well, and even today, isn't this the deadline for the end of the budget year? And so rather than rein in all that out of control spending, I know we were all giddy when Doge did its thing earlier this year, but it looks like another continuing resolution is the best they can do. Let's kick the can down the road another few weeks and see what happens. But slowing the roll of the spending, it turns out, is really not something that very many in Washington are interested in.
Yeah, doesn't the first a month or first few weeks of Trump's second term seem like it was 30 years ago? I mean,
Yeah.
everything has changed. The initial emphasis that we were all so relieved and happy about, of cutting back all of this stuff that's been going on, and of focusing on things that matter to Americans, apparently no longer matters to the Trump administration. I read just the other day that in addition to just blowing up boats full of people he doesn't like on the assumption that they're drug dealers. Now they're talking about actually sending the military into Venezuela and bombing targets in Venezuela that they claim are associated with the drug trade. And again, I'm not
Mm.
defending drug dealers. It's beside the point. It's about wanton murder without any kind of judicial process and just endowing the Jefe, the great leader, with
Yep.
the power to just kill whoever he likes on his say so.
Well, all I can say is thank goodness Congress is on top of this, and
I
none of this is happening without a congressional declaration. What's that?
Yeah. Oh
Oh,
my God, it's
Congress is
terrible.
nowhere to be found?
Yeah,
Mm.
it's unconscionable, and that we can't have a serious conversation about these things. And I suppose it's because they have succeeded in doing something which is probably undoable, short of some kind of a collapse. And what do I mean by that? Probably 50% of the people in this country, and maybe more, to one degree or another, are dependent on a government check, whether directly in the form of some kind of government program or indirectly in that they work for an entity that does business with the government. So, when people's bread is buttered in a certain way, they tend to be protective of that. So how do you deal with that? Even with the best of intentions, if a congressman says, well, we're going to cut this program or reduce this budget, there are howls of outrage back in the district because, their ox is being gored. We've gotten to that thing, that awful point in this country where, at one time there was a sufficiency of people in this country who earned an honest living and didn't want their money to be taken away from them by the government. I think, unfortunately, we've passed that point.
No, I'm with you. And okay, it, let's talk about some of the things we can do. I mean, there are some things that are out of our control, but there are also ways that we can position ourselves so that if if the great fall is coming, we won't have as far to fall. What are some of the ways that you like to hedge your bets? I mean, you held up that silver round before. Real money, I think, is a possibility. What else do you look at?
Well, to get back to the cat food thing, one thing we've been considering doing, and I think we're going to do it, is figure out a way to make our own cat food using bulk food. Rather than buying
Ah,
a bag of prepared store-bought food. It's analogous to, you buy prepared food in the store, and anybody who knows home economics knows that that's a huge waste of money. To buy food that somebody else has cooked, prepared, and put in a box for you, as opposed to buying the ingredients. Good example of this. You go to McDonald's and you buy, let's say, 2 quarter pounders with cheese, 2 fries, and 2 drinks, and that's just for 2 people. Let's not assume you have kids in the car too. Well, you're looking at spending $30 probably just for that. Why not go to the
easily.
store and buy some ground beef for that? You can still buy probably about 4 pounds of ground beef for that amount of money, and then you can use that to make food to feed yourself for a week. And that's a way to kind of counteract the cost of inflation that's being imposed on us.
And this is not a flex, but for those who have access to food that's produced in your community, in my case, I have a potato field that was just harvested, just to the north of me. I mean, like literally right on the edge of my yard, and permission from the owner of that field. Hey, yeah, go glean whatever you want. Well, we did. And we didn't take
That's
away,
excellent.
hundreds of pounds, but we took away several nice sacks of potatoes. And so we're, eating stuff that was produced locally. There's a farmer's market here every Saturday, at least for the next few weeks. And I'm amazed at the amount of stuff that's produced locally. And I would say even more so than just, yes, buy those local things, make the connections with people who have resources and, bring what you can to add value to the table.
You bring up something I think that's very relevant, and it's something that most of us aren't used to because this lifestyle hasn't been common for a long time in this country, probably not since the 30s or 40s. But give you an example. We had chickens. Our flock got decimated, but when we have chickens, we had a surplus of eggs, more than we could use. Our neighbors, on the other hand, like to grow vegetables, which we didn't do, and we're friendly with the neighbors. So we would give them eggs, and they would give us vegetables. So we were able to sort of multiply our collective efforts in a really cool cooperative way. And both of us then had eggs and vegetables without having to go to the store. And this is something that Americans used to routinely practice. And to the extent you can, I know it's hard for people who live in the city, but if you live out in the suburbs or country, get to know people and figure out, well, they do this really well, but I do this really well. You get friendly with people, you can kind of start talking about it and have that conversation and offer, hey, I'm willing to do this for you. For example, I know how to fix cars. So, I can do car repairs for somebody who perhaps can do things that I can't do and will, in exchange for me fixing their car, will give me something that I'd otherwise be unable to do myself.
And you want to talk about a marketable skill too. But I have a car sitting out in the driveway right now. Yes, slowly dripping oil, little by little, which I would love to get it fixed. But being that it's a Volkswagen, I'm looking at probably a minimum of $5,000 to get
Sure.
that thing in and get everything addressed that I need to get addressed. And so anything that a person can do to further their own automotive maintenance. My son does oil changes. That's a
Yep.
huge saving. Being able to do things though, the small things for yourself is very helpful. And if you have the capability of doing more, do more. But
Yep.
it's really time to I think decentralize as much as possible.
Yeah, one of the things that I picked up on when I was much younger, and I used to read biographies of our founding fathers, and a common theme among that cadre of people was that they had become proficient in so many things. You know, Thomas Jefferson was a guy who was a scholar, but he was also a farmer. You know, he was able to make furniture. Ben Franklin is another example. You know, he was a printer who became a scientist, and these people were very well versed in all sorts of things. You know, whereas modern industrial society has kind of pigeonholed people into becoming specialists in one particular thing, particularly if you're talking about college educated people. Very bright people, they go to college and they become very proficient at that one thing that they've studied. And then they focus on that in their work, but they're utterly helpless in everything else. You know, and that's a danger Will Robinson kind of position to be in when things get tight and you have to rely on other people to help you to do things that are important and even critical.
And there's another aspect of this too. And I know you actually, I think, lead out by example on this. Um, Taking care of yourself, making sure that your body is strong and taking your health seriously. That's you don't want to outsource that to, oh, doc, I'm not feeling well. Give me something to fix it. No, you be the one who's proactive. You be the one who's strong, and you may need that strength sometime. You may not have electricity or the tools that you want to do a job like digging or something like that. Um, have the stamina, have the strength and the calluses that if need be, you could do that kind of work and not collapse from a heart attack.
Yeah, and also not be destroyed financially. I don't know whether you caught this the other day, but apparently they're talking about imposing some sort of a new AI algorithm on Medicare approvals for medical procedures. Essentially, the object is to delay, you know, giving people the care that they need. So don't assume that the government is going to take care of you. It probably won't. What it wants is to extract money from you for the course of your working life while you're able to, and when you're older, when you need help, and you go to the government for help, you know, they're probably going to try to soil and green you in the future because of all of these financial pressures. So I think it's intelligent to do everything you can to maintain your vitality and your health by good eating habits and good habits generally, so that it's not an issue and you don't have to rely on these government programs or the doctors and their pills and all the rest of it.
And I would also add to that, to strengthening family relationships. I know this is it's going to sound like, oh, you want to make sure you're tight with your family so you can mooch off them. I'm talking more about when you have family members who need some extra help. My mom right now, she requires a lot of extra help paying her bills, making sure her lawn is kept up. She fell last week and fortunately wasn't hurt, but she couldn't get up by herself. And having neighbors and people who are close to her. I live a good half hour away from her, but there were people who were able to get to her very quickly, get her back on her feet. That kind of stuff is invaluable. And again, it's not something that's just outsourced. Well, we'll get some VA nurse or somebody, to come in here and care for. And this, if you have fences to mend with family, do it now before times get tough.
Yeah, I mean, they
Or
have trained us, unfortunately, for generations to consider ourselves atomized individuals as opposed to interconnected people. And it's not about mooching. Our parents took care of us when we couldn't take care of ourselves. And it used to be from time immemorial that as children became adults and the parents aged, that role would change. And, you know, you would then assume the responsibility of taking care of your parents. And it's a good and healthy thing. It's not mooching. Of course, some people are exploitative, but that's a separate matter. We're just talking about helping one another. And that's how you build a family and build a community. And ultimately, you build a country. You can't build a community, much less a country, on narcissistic, self entitled people who don't give a damn about anybody else.
and I think a part of the shift in mindset. I know I'm speaking from what has helped me find peace in a world that's really bereft of peace for the most part. Um, you got to learn to shift your focus away from the circus in Washington D.C. I know that, most media outlets, even a lot of conservative outlets, still portray that as this is the nerve center of everything that matters
Yeah.
in this world. And it's really not, except to the degree that we allow ourselves to be pulled in and held captive by it.
I agree, and I've actually come around on the idea of voting, certainly at the presidential level. I'm tired of Clown A and Clown B, and ending up as who it was a great observation. No matter who you vote for, you end up with John McCain. Who said that? It may have
Right.
been
Tom
Tom Woods.
Woods.
Right, Tom Woods
Yes.
who said that. But it's absolutely true, and it's demoralizing and it's frustrating. We have this oligopoly, this autarky, this regime that gives us, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and we do in a sense legitimize it by voting for it. We think we're voting for the lesser of two evils, but we still get evil. I'm not saying that at the local level where you actually have some influence and you might actually even be able to speak with the person who maybe is running for school board or mayor or sheriff or whatever it may be. But I think it's time to withdraw our consent at the national level. And by doing that, we make it much more difficult for them to have legitimacy. If we get to a point where it's obvious that only 25% of the country is even participating in these elections, they're a farce. And yeah, they can still rule us with bayonets if they have to, but that's more difficult to maintain than when we just kind of go along with it because we assume it's a legitimate system.
And I live in Idaho, where we're a little bit of an island of freedom out here in the Pacific Northwest. But something that I've seen a lot of emphasis on is electing people at the state and local level who are willing to interpose themselves between their constituents and the federal government if necessary. And we had a big Medicaid expansion that really expanded the overall budget of the state, but the pushback on it and the attempts to rein it in are very encouraging. Maybe
Yeah.
we haven't accomplished it yet, but I'm seeing there is an understanding of people who are willing to cut those strings that are attached to those federal dollars and just say, you know what, we're better off without the money and without the control.
Yeah, a reform that I'd like to see, and this is a Herculean task, but I'd like to see us go back to what existed in this country for, gosh, until when? Until at least the Civil War. I think the amendment that came that changed things was after the Civil War, that allowed for the general statewide election of senators, as opposed to senators being appointed by state legislatures and thus representing the interests of the state, rather than these popular elections. Senators are now just sort of glorified congressmen, and they've really undermined states' rights, which is important. We're not waving the Confederate battle flag. We're just talking about what you talked about decentralizing authority, which is a healthy thing if you want to have a republic, a relatively free country.
And with a nod toward my friends who are diehard Trump supporters, the great danger is, well, our guy's in charge, and so therefore it's safe. If he says something has to go from the national level on down, that's what we want. But they're not thinking far enough ahead to, this is his last term. So who will replace him? We don't know. And
Well,
if you may trust him with that power, but I don't really trust anybody with that power.
nobody should be trusted with that power. And I'm just kind of baffled, by people who were upset about the way the Biden administration was suppressing speech as misinformation and hateful during those 4 years. Now are sort of insouciant, don't particularly mind that Trump is doing things like sicking the federal FCC on people like Jimmy Kimmel. I don't particularly like Jimmy Kimmel. I think he's sort of a third-rate hack, but it's not the federal government's business to interpose itself in that. If his show stinks, well, people won't watch it. And then, the advertisers won't pay to be on it. And eventually his employer will say, you stink. We're going to get somebody who's funny. And that's how you deal with things like this. You don't have the federal government decide who's allowed to be on the air and not. Like you said, a lot of people think, well, it's our guy and he's going after somebody we don't like because we don't like Jimmy Kimmel. Well, what happens when we get AOC or Pete Buttigieg in there as president and they wheel around and say, well, good for the goose, good for the gander, which is exactly what they're going to do.
And as much as I detest Antifa, designating them as a terrorist operation opens some very interesting possibilities because, again, if you get AOC in there, it's a guarantee that anybody to the right of Chairman Mao is going to be designated as a terrorist and addressed, accordingly.
Yeah, I hope we don't have to learn this the hard way. I really, really hope so.
Same here. Eric, we're down to the last couple of minutes here. Let's talk some automotive stuff. Tell me
Sure.
about what's either new, exciting, or hopelessly discouraging that's come across your radar screen lately.
Well, something interesting. I wrote an article that I published also this morning about the news that Lexus has canceled its LS sedan, which is its top of the line model. And it built Lexus. Back in 1989, when Toyota created Lexus as its luxury division, it came out with this LS 400 sedan. And the thing about it was better built, more reliable, and it held its value longer than an S-Class Mercedes or a BMW 7 Series. And people bought them because why wouldn't you? And for 37 years, that car was immensely successful. Well, they've canceled it because it's not selling. And so I thought to myself, why is that? Well, I think one of the reasons why has to do with shrinkage, if you will. And I rant about this all the time, but I think it's important. Even at that price point, you're talking about a car that's at the $80,000 plus level. What do you get for your money? Well, you used to get a wonderful V8 engine. Now, what do you get? A 3.5 liter V6, which is the kind of engine you used to get in a $30,000 car like a Camry, a family sedan, which, by the way, you can't get that anymore either. Now it's a four-cylinder only deal. Anyway, I mean, I drive these cars for a living. And so when I get into, one of these things, like a $60,000 Mercedes E-Class or a BMW 5, and it has a 2-liter four-cylinder engine, and you push down on the accelerator pedal, and what do you hear? You hear the sound of a four-cylinder engine, and it's just kind of disappointing. And I know that, some of these engines actually make more power than the bigger engines that used to be under the hood, but it's more than that. It's not just the power, it's the sense of gravitas and heft. There's a reason why Toyota and Lexus have had to resort to something called sound augmentation technology. What is that? Well, it's an artificial means of piping in the sound of a bigger engine in the car that has this little engine. And what does that tell you? They're admitting that something's not there that should be there. I think people are feeling gypped, I guess, is my bottom line point. When you spend close to 6 figures on a car, you want to have something that's a cut above what the dude in the next lane who's driving the $30,000 car has. So it's sad. I hate to see this happen.
Well, as one who enjoys the comforting rumble of a good V8, I totally understand what you're saying. Eric, thanks so much for being my guest today. I'll have a link to your website in my show notes and look forward to our conversation next week.
Excellent. Thank you, Bryan. Me too.